In April 1865, with his army surrounded, his soldiers weak and exhausted, General Robert E. Lee realized there was little choice but to consider the surrender of his Confederate Army to Ulysses S. Grant, commanding general of the Union Army. Only 1 month before, on March 4, 1865, President Abraham Lincoln delivered his second inaugural address. Lincoln did not speak of happiness, but of sadness. The president put reconciliation with the Confederacy at the top of his agenda as the Civil War drew to a close. He said, "Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle and for his widow and his orphan, to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and a lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations." On April 9, 1865, Lee and Grant met to discuss the issue of surrender at the home of Wilmer and Virginia McLean in the rural town of Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. Grant arrived in his muddy field uniform, while Lee had turned out in full dress attire, complete with sash and sword. The two generals, both graduates of the United States Military Academy at West Point, briefly spoke about their only previous encounter, which took place during the Mexican-American War of 1846. Lee soon turned his attention back to the surrender issue and asked for the terms. Grant offered terms he had previously offered. According to the President's instructions, as indicated in his inaugural address, the terms were extremely generous. All Confederate soldiers would have to turn in their rifles, but they were to be pardoned, and they would be sent home with their private property, most importantly with their horses, which could be used for a late spring planting. Officers were allowed to keep their sidearms, and Lee's starving men would be given Union rations. The terms were more generous than any Lee could have hoped for. Lee looked up at Grant and remarked, "This will have a very happy effect on my army." The terms of the surrender were recorded in a document handwritten by Grant's adjutant, Eli S. Park, a Native American of the Seneca tribe. Lee, upon discovering Park to be a Seneca, said, "It is good to have one real American here." Parker replied, "Sir, we are all Americans." After formal copies of the surrender document were made and the document signed, Lee made the gentlemanly attempt to surrender his sword, but Grant refused this action, believing that the commander of the Confederate Army should walk out with his sword and return to his waiting troops with honor. When Lee left the house, Grant then stepped down from the porch and, moving toward Lee, saluted him by raising his hat. All Union officers present followed their commander in the same act. As Lee rode away, Grant's men began cheering in celebration, but Grant ordered an immediate stop. "I at once sent word, however, to have it stopped," he said. The Confederates were now our countrymen, and we did not want to exult over their downfall. The next day, the two leaders met again. At this meeting, it was agreed that Lee's troops would receive parole passes in order to allow them to travel home and obtain food at federally controlled stations in the South. On April 12th, a formal ceremony of surrender took place. Brigadier General Joshua L. Chamberlain was the Union officer selected to lead the ceremony. General John B. Gordon was the Confederate officer. In his memoirs entitled "The Passing of the Armies," Chamberlain reflected on what he witnessed on April 12, 1865. Chamberlain wrote, "Instructions had been given, and when the head of each division column comes opposite our group, our bugle sounds the signal, and instantly our whole line from right to left, regiment by regiment in succession, gives the soldier's salutation from the order arms to the old carry, the marching salute. Gordon, at the head of the column, riding with heavy spirit and downcast face, catches the sound of shifting arms, looks up, and taking the meaning, wheels superbly, making with himself and his horse one uplifted figure, with profound salutation, as he drops the point of his sword to the boot toe. Then, facing to his own command, gives word for his successive brigades to pass us with the same position of the manual, honor answering honor. On our part, not a sound of trumpet more, nor roll of drum, not a cheer, nor word, nor whisper of vainglorying, nor motion of man standing again at the order, but an awed stillness rather, and breath holding, as if it were the passing of the dead. At the surrender ceremonies, about 28,000 Confederate soldiers passed by and stacked their arms. No one was bothered in the rest of his life. Lee never forgot Grant's magnanimity during the surrender. Likewise, General Gordon cherished Chamberlain's simple act of saluting the surrendering army, calling Chamberlain one of the knightliest soldiers of the Federal Army. Leniency makes America great. The surrender of the Confederate Army provides an unusual example of reconciliation after the U.S. Civil War for the world.